Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
Welcome into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network Team Autopsy Report. We're going to continue our trip through the Southeastern Conference. We're going to pull up on the plains of Auburn, Alabama. Let's take a look at Coach Hugh Freeze, because there's some interesting data points in his resume that we need to kind of start to take full examination of. As a head coach, 12 years as a head coach, Hugh Freeze is 94-57. Now, had that 1 year at Arkansas State where he went 10-3. Parlayed that into the Ole Miss job, where had some interesting tenure there in Oxford, going 39-25. So looks like a winning percentage of 61%. His 4 years at Liberty, 34 wins, 15 losses, win percentage of 69%. Got a reprieve to come back into the Southeastern Conference after the double secret probation. And in his 2 years there as the head coach of Auburn, he is 11 wins and 14 losses, 44% winning percentage. Year 3 for Hugh Freeze is going to be very interesting. But before we get to year 3 for Hugh Freeze, let's go back and take a look at year 2, because there's some things on this Auburn autopsy report that made me kind of do a little bit of a double take. So let's see if we can't work through some of the questions that I had about this team last year. Let's start right there with the season win total. Season win total for this team back in June was 7.5. Fell significantly short of that, only winning 5 games last year. When we look at our composite win total number, basically in season, 3 unique data points give us this number. And based on that, we're looking at a team that should have been 6.5. So this team should have been at least 6 wins, potentially 7. I think we're going to take a look at this schedule here in just a moment and see if we can't find out which 2 of those games are. If you're watching this on YouTube or streaming this on our Twitter feed at Crunch Time VIP, I want to say thank you. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, I want to say thank you as well and welcome aboard. If this is your first podcast, if so, we invite you to go back and listen throughout our entire series as we go through all of the Power 4 teams doing their team autopsy report. You've been with us. Thank you for coming back. All right, now let's take a look at the strength of schedule and the strength of record. Basically, the only part of your strength of schedule that you can control is your non-conference. Who did you put on the schedule in your non-conference? Did you load up on cupcakes or did you really kind of challenge yourself? Now, your strength of record, you absolutely have no control over that whatsoever. That basically is how did your opponents perform throughout their season that gives you your strength of record. So let's take a look at Auburn. 4.81%. You're looking at a team that had the 36th strength of schedule ranking there. So we know that gets beefed up by playing in the Southeastern Conference. We'll take a look at how their non-conference looked. As far as their strength of record, 0.561, 49th. So their schedule was a little bit stronger than their opponent's winning percentage was. And we're going to get to that here in just a moment. Matter of fact, if we can go ahead and pull that up on the screen. And like I said, for those of you watching on YouTube or streaming this live, we got you. I'm going to give the audience that's listening on the podcast all of this data right now so they can absolutely stay connected with us. Let's take a look at the opponent's records for Auburn. Going to discount Alabama A&M because they're an FCS team. Cal, 6-6. New Mexico, 5-7. Arkansas, 6-6. Oklahoma, 6-6. Longtime rival there in the Georgia Bulldogs, 10-2. Missouri was 9-3. Kentucky, 4-8. Vanderbilt, 6-6. Louisiana Monroe, 5-7. Texas A&M, 8-4, and ending that regular season in the Iron Bowl with Alabama. Crimson Tide finished 9-3. Let's take a look at how good were the opponents' defenses that Auburn's offense had to go up against week in and week out. We use a baseline number of 68. Reason for that is because there's 68 Power 4 teams in college football last year. The Cal Golden Bears were 46th. Arkansas was 44th. Oklahoma was 8th. Georgia was 5th. Missouri was 20th. Kentucky, 13th best defense last year. Wow. Vanderbilt was 32nd. Texas A&M was 30th, and Alabama was 6th last year. You're talking about an average power ranking of 39. This probably would have belonged to a team that was probably 8-4, pushing for 9-3, just based on what would have been their defensive performances. So I would probably venture to say that this defense for Auburn's opponents would have probably been a 9-3 team if I really, really think about it a little bit deeper. I said we would take a look at the games where Auburn probably should have turned those losses into wins. If I had to look right off the bat, I would probably say you would like to think that they should have won the game against Cal when they lost that 21-14 in the Missouri game. losing that one 21-17. So in their losses, you can just look, the offense really struggled to put together points. I'll get to that at the end of the podcast here. Now, let's talk about their offense and let's do a really deep dive here and see where was the issue with this team. Was it coaching? Was it offense? Was it defense? Was it situational play? What caused this team to not get to at least 6 wins and make a bowl game? Average team last year in college football averaged about 28 points per game. Auburn's accounting stats say 27.8. When we adjust that for opponent, not much of a difference, 27.3. So no big difference there. The average team last year, 227 yards per game passing. On the surface, Auburn threw the ball for 264 yards per game. When we adjust that for opponents, goes down to 235 yards passing per game. So almost a 30-yard difference there. Average team ran the ball for about 160 yards per game. When we look at Auburn's 165.5 yards per game rushing, but when we adjust that for opponent, Auburn was much better running the ball, 206 yards per game, a 40-yard improvement there. Average team last year, 387 yards per game of total offense. Auburn Tigers, 429. When we adjust that for opponent, goes up a little bit to 441. So about a 12-yard improvement there. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper. Average team finished their drives with either a touchdown or field goal 40% of the time. That's exactly where Auburn was, 40.2. When we look at drives ending with a touchdown, average team last year was about 29%, Auburn 32.5%. As far as third down conversion, average team was at 39%, the Auburn Tigers at 44%. So you're listening and looking at some of those numbers and thinking Auburn should have definitely been at a six-win team. Here's where the numbers start to get a little bit shaky for their offense. 25 sacks allowed. That's just really one over the average for what a team would have given up last year. 22 turnovers committed. This team was giving up turnovers majorly. So if I had to bullet point their offense, I would say struggled with consistency. When you're committing 22 turnovers, pretty sure I'm going to see some games on their docket here that they had multiple turnovers in games that probably could have flipped the difference between them winning and losing. Let's dive one more step deeper into their offense. Our 3 E's. How effective, explosive, and efficient was your offense last year? The Auburn Tigers, 48th effective offense, 46 in explosiveness, and 56 in efficiency. The Auburn Tigers ended the regular season for us last year as the 52nd overall ranked offense out of 134 teams. You can get away with that in a weaker conference. Not going to get away with that in the Southeastern Conference. Let's take a look at the defense now. How good were the opponents' offenses that the Auburn Tigers defense faced last year? Once again, we're going to use that baseline of 68. And we find that the New Mexico Lobos were 52nd. Arkansas had an offense that finished the regular season power ranked as our 35th team. Oklahoma was 62nd. Boy, you can see the difference in not having an offensive-minded head coach there. Offense that low for Oklahoma. Haven't seen that in a long time. Georgia, 12th best offense last year as far as our metrics go. Missouri was 53rd. Vanderbilt was 51st. Texas A&M was 22nd. Alabama had the number 2 offense in our metrics last year. So 8 of their opponents would have been inside of that top 68. You're now looking at an average power ranking of 51. You're now looking at a team that's possibly 7-5 based on their offense. If things were to break, probably could have been an 8-4 offense. So the defense for Auburn did not face the same quality week in and week out as their offense faced defenses last year. All right, let's do a deep dive into their defensive metrics. Once again, I'm just going to give the accounting stats numbers and then our adjusted numbers. Auburn gave up 21.3 points per game. When we adjust that for opponent, goes down by a point to 20.3. When we look at passing yardage, Auburn's defense allowed 213 yards per game passing. When we adjust that for opponent, actually improves to 196.5, so almost a 17-yard improvement there. As far as the rush defense, it was already good. It actually got better when we adjusted. 118 yards per game allowed. When we adjust that for opponent, goes down to 112. Auburn allowed their opponents 331 yards per game in total offense. When we adjust that for opponent, goes down to 308. This was a very good Auburn defense last year. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper. Scoring drives, their opponents ending with a score 30% of the time, almost 10 percentage points better than the NCAA average. As far as their opponents' drive ending with a touchdown, 22.5%. Also better than what the NCAA average was. And then their opponents converting on third downs, only 34%, almost 6 percentage points better than the NCAA average. Auburn did a decent job of getting after the quarterback. They allowed 25 sacks. They generated 25 sacks. Their opponents, okay on fourth downs, 9 out of 18. Auburn could not force enough turnovers, though. Only 13 forced turnovers. Now, let's dive one more layer into this and look at their efficiency, explosiveness, and effectiveness on defense. Auburn's defense was 33rd effectiveness last year. As far as giving up explosive plays, they were 28th. As far as efficiency, they were 33rd. The Auburn Tigers finished with our 31st overall ranked defense. So their defense was much better than what their offense were in those 3 E's. If I had to bullet point their defense, I would say above average, but definitely got worn down once we started to get into the heart of their schedule in conference play. Let's take a look at the coaching situation and special teams. Let's start with the special teams first, because this was a major weakness for the Auburn Tigers last year. 52% conversion on field goal attempts. Folks, that is over almost 25 percentage points below the NCAA average last year, where field goal kickers were making about 76% of their field goal attempts. That's a far cry from what we've seen from the Auburn Tigers in the last decade, when their field goal kicker has absolutely been a strength for this team. Major weakness there. Did convert all of their extra points. As far as their punting, averaged about 3.6 punts per game for 42.5 yards per punt, 68th in college football last year. So that's why I say major weakness there. As far as the coaching situation, Hugh Freeze last year, 1-3 versus in games that were a one-score contest. Got to get better in that area. And then when we look at games against quality opponents, 2 wins, 6 losses. Again, 25%. Folks, you're going to see a lot of good teams in the Southeastern Conference, a lot of quality teams. You got to find a way to beat them if you want to make a bowl game. Now, as far as Hugh Freeze being aggressive going forward on fourth downs, did not see that last year. Was 82nd out of 144 qualifying head coaches last year. So only went for it about 13% of the time in fourth down situations there. So that's a little bit surprising. But when you look at their conversion rate, only 47% conversion rate going forward on fourth downs, it makes sense why Hugh was a little bit less aggressive, if you will. Let's take a look before we look at the splits here. Peyton Thorne, 11 games last year. We know transfer quarterback from the Big Ten, completed 63% of his passes, 2,713 yards passing, 21 passing touchdowns, 9 interceptions. You do not like that touchdown to INT ratio from a veteran quarterback. You can maybe get away with that from a true freshman just out of high school. You're talking about a quarterback who's played enough games to where you can't be committing that many turnovers. When we look at the run game, Jaquez Hunter led this team in rushing. We know he's off to the NFL. In 12 games, 187 attempts, 1,201 yards, 6.4 yards per rushing attempt, 8 touchdowns. This young man averaged 100 yards per game rushing. We talked about it all season long during the big show that the Auburn Tigers needed to feature him much more than what they did and took way too long to get him really going. Let's talk about their leading receiver in Keandre Lambert-Smith. 50 receptions, 981 yards, 19.6 yards per reception, and 8 touchdowns. Young man averaged 82 yards per game receiving. That's absolutely phenomenal. Their young phenom wide receiver Cam Coleman, 37 receptions, 598 yards, 16.2 yards per reception, also had 8 touchdowns, averaged about 54 yards per game. You expect that number to go up more with Cam Coleman this year. And like I said, I thought he had a really, really good freshman year. We know about the other 2 freshmen that in the country that had really good years. Jeremiah Smith for Ohio State, and across the state there with Ryan Williams. Don't sleep on Cam Coleman. This young man has a lot of talent, and I think his numbers will absolutely take a bump up in 2025 if he can get better quarterbacking play there from the Auburn Tigers. Let's take a look at the splits here. And how did Auburn's offense do in those 5 wins versus how they looked in those 7 losses? In their wins, 46.6 points per game. Yeah, I would call that significant. Threw the ball about 30 times per game for 293 yards, 9.9 yards per attempt, 14.9 yards per completion. Okay, so we know that came against some really suspect defense, because you're not going to be able to average that for an entire season. 37 rushing attempts per game for 228 yards per game rushing, 6.1 yards per rushing attempt. 520 yards of total offense on 67 plays per game. Ladies and gentlemen, that's 7.8 yards per play. 5.8 touchdowns per game. So you're talking about literally almost 6 touchdowns per game in those wins. 1.5 turnovers per game. So even in their wins, they were still turning the ball over quite significantly. 54% on third down conversions. And I've mentioned 7 turnovers in those 5 wins. Now, in those 7 losses, you're looking at a team that scored 14 points per game. 32 passing plays, significant drop-off in the passing yards. 243 yards per game passing in those games. 7.7 yards per passing attempt, 12.9 yards per completion. The run game absolutely dropped off as well. 31 rushing attempts per game, only 121 yards per game rushing, 3.9 yards per rushing attempt. Average plays per game, about 63 plays per game, but the total offense goes down to 364 yards per game in those losses, 5.8 yards per play, 1.6 touchdowns per game, 2.1 turnovers per game. I told you this team was suffering with turnovers, whether they won or lost. You just saw they couldn't put up points in those losses. 32% on third downs, 38% on fourth downs in those losses, 15 total turnovers in those 7 losses. So we know there was a big drop off in the point differential. The biggest drop off for me would definitely be the run game, over 108 yards difference when they lost. So when Auburn could not run the ball, they couldn't win because the passing game absolutely struggled significantly as well. Let's take a look at the defensive splits here for the Auburn Tigers. In their 5 wins, 17.5 points per game. Their opponents, 220 yards passing on 31 attempts, 7.1 yards per attempt, 13.6 yards per completion. Not giving up a lot of big yards as far as the attempts go, but when their opponents' receivers or backs were catching the ball, almost 14 yards per pass completion, way too high. Their opponents, 35 rushing attempts in those 5 wins, 99 yards per game allowed, 2.8 yards per rushing attempt. Did a good job of the total yardage, only 319 yards per game to their opponents in total offense, 4.8 yards per play. Opponents, looks like 36% third down conversion, and Auburn forced 5 turnovers in those wins. In the losses, not a big swing as far as the point differential goes. Allowing 24 points per game, you can still win a lot of games if your defense is only giving up 24 points. The passing yardage, not giving up big yardage as far as passing goes. In those 7 losses, 208 yards per game. So goes down on 28 pass attempts per game, 7.4 yards per attempt, 12.3 yards per completion. So you're thinking they gave up major yards in the run game. Well, their opponents ran the ball 40 times per game, so almost 5 more rushing attempts per game, 131 yards per game rushing. You can survive giving up that. 3.3 yards per rushing attempt, 4.9 yards per play. Auburn gave up, looks like almost an additional touchdown per game, goes up to 2.9. The turnovers forced per game, 1.1. So not a big difference there as far as their splits between wins and losses. Their opponents converting on third downs in those 7 losses, 45%. Their opponents did a much better job of converting on third downs, 67%. Forced 8 turnovers in those 7 losses. So when we look at the breakdown as far as total offense, the only big difference is they gave up about 30 more yards per game rushing there. So I think we're ready to get to the final grade for the Auburn Tigers. The Auburn Tigers in 2024 would get a C- for us. The reason for that, we did like the strong running game in the win, above average defensive playmakers, and very disciplined, committing few penalties. What we didn't like is an ineffective passing game, sack issues when it mattered. Poor special teams, low field goal percentage, and failed to close out tight games. We saw that in the Iron Bowl when they forced Alabama into multiple turnovers, could not take advantage of that by their offense. So the final verdict, Auburn's underperformed significantly with a struggling passing offense and an unreliable special team unit, leading to multiple close game losses. The defense was strong. The offense did not provide enough support. So what are the 3 keys for the Auburn Tigers in 2025? 1, you got to improve the pass efficiency on offense. Can't have a quarterback turning the ball over that much, and you got to get stronger decision making. Completing only 63% of your passes, and that kind of offense needs to be more around 68%. Key number 2 is you got to address the special teams issues, both the field goal kicking and the punting. Hit the transfer portal, hit the recruiting trail, and look to upgrade that unit immediately. And then finally, Hugh Freeze, this falls on you, the late game execution in close games. We talked about it. You have to be better in your decision making as a head coach in those late game situations and against quality opponents. If the Auburn Tigers can improve in these areas, the Auburn Tigers can absolutely find their way back into a bowl game in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at CrunchTimeSportsAdvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.